What's happening, YouTube? Doug from the Love Aquarium here. Part of my job is to help people choose their tanks, what they're going to keep, what size. There's a lot of things to consider: fish, shrimp, freshwater, saltwater, glass, acrylic. So I'm going to help you today, and we're going to find out a little bit about what goes into choosing a tank. So a lot of times when I'm having a conversation with people about choosing a tank, I will often ask what their goals are. Sometimes people have a particular fish or something else that they want to keep. Sometimes they just want to try something new. Sometimes they just want to get a tank to have a tank. So we're going to go over some of the considerations. So one, if you have a particular animal that you're trying to keep, well, what does it need? You know, if you're trying to keep an Oscar, I'm not going to suggest something like this. Obviously, it'd be perfect for shrimp, so that could be a different suggestion for someone who's trying to keep shrimp. So you don't want to crowd your animals. I mean, if you're keeping an Oscar, they're kind of notorious for being kept in tanks that are too small. Of course, we don't recommend that. You know, you want to be considerate of the things that you're trying to keep. You're trying to keep them healthy and enjoy them, so it would be best to choose wisely in that respect. So if you do have something that you're trying to keep in particular, that will probably shift your decision a little bit on which tank to do. Another question that I get asked a lot is there a difference between tanks for freshwater and saltwater? There can be, but when you're talking about just a tank, something like this that is just straight up tank, doesn't have anything built into it, this could be used for fresh or saltwater. It doesn't really matter. It just kind of matters the equipment that you're going to put on it. So another big consideration is glass versus acrylic. So they do both have their pros and their cons. We'll start with the acrylic. So acrylic is lighter than glass, so not that you're going to be moving it around a whole lot, but sometimes moving something into the home even, that's a consideration. You know, this 180-gallon acrylic tank is much lighter than a 180-gallon glass tank, I assure you. So it's much lighter. It's a plastic, which is very strong. So sometimes people are worried they have kids, small kids throwing things in there, getting crazy. You know, they don't want the tank to break. Not that I've ever heard of that really happening, but acrylic's going to be much stronger. And usually most acrylic manufacturers will guarantee it against leakage. So another thing about acrylic is that it is a better insulator than glass. So depending on what your situation is, you know, warm climates, cold climates, hot house, cold house, it's going to be much better at insulating. So I mean, if you don't have heat in the house or something like that, you don't have AC, it's going to maintain a more stable temperature usually. So that's another kind of plus depending on what your situation is. The couple drawbacks: one, acrylic is just a more expensive material, so acrylic tanks in general are more expensive than glass, but they are very nice, and they have all the pros that I just mentioned. The other drawback is that they're a plastic, so they can scratch. However, I always kind of joke with people like, oh, well, acrylic can scratch, and I'll tell them, so can your car. Don't scratch it. So when you're cleaning, you know, you just have to basically be mindful, you know, when you're scrubbing. Don't do a careless job. Don't get gravel or sand in your scrub pad and then drag it all over your nice acrylic tank. You will not dig that. So as far as the glass tanks, you know, they're much more resilient to scratching. So I mean, if you do get a little something in your scrub pad, you're shuffling rocks around, whatever, it's probably not going to scratch. It's going to take a lot to scratch it. They are a little bit cheaper than acrylic tanks in general. This one's a little pricier. It's a nice Ultim rimless tank. It's also low iron. So the other thing I failed to mention about acrylic is that it's actually more clear than glass. Sometimes when you look at the seams of a glass tank, you'll see that dark green. This is a pretty light green because it's low iron. But if we look at something like this tank here, it has much darker corners, and that's the iron in the glass. So a couple other things about acrylic versus the glass. Acrylic is much easier to drill. So if you're going to be plumbing holes in the back, you know, things in the bottom, it's going to be easier to drill and be able to customize it as you will. Although a lot of tank manufacturers, if you're buying a tank, you can kind of get customizations on it. Feel free to talk to us about that. Some of the glass tanks, sometimes glass is tempered. Glass is kind of brittle sometimes, so drilling it can be risky. So I hope you know what you're doing if you plan to do something like that. So that's a couple more considerations when kind of choosing what your next tank is going to be, or your first tank. So something else to kind of think about when you're choosing a tank, sometimes it depends on what you're keeping, but this tank, for example, it is just a tank. It doesn't have any holes in it, no overflow boxes or anything, so you're gonna have to add filtration to that. So I mean, we can put a big old hang on the back, a couple hang on the backs, nice big canister filter on there, depending on what we're trying to keep. Versus something like this that has a built-in overflow box. So this allows water to actually leave the tank going below to a sump situation, and that is an area that increases your water volume of your system. It also allows you to add additional filtration down there. If you need specialized filtration for some reason, you might be keeping a reef tank, you might need a refugium. Sometimes people will be growing corals down there. If you have a problematic fish, sometimes you can put it down there. Someone that needs to recover for a little bit, they got kind of whooped on and you can't get down to the fish shop to take it back yet. You can put them down there. So a lot of times if you're gonna order a tank especially, you can get these customizations built in, so you could very easily get an overflow box installed in a tank like this. If you did want to add a sump. So personally, I like to keep tanks pretty simple. I've been doing this for an awful long time, so I'm not worried about myself maintaining a tank. But sometimes, if you're new, that's kind of a consideration, what's gonna make it easier for you to keep a tank. Sometimes I'll suggest a filter that may be easier to maintain versus, what would be considered a potentially better filter. So something like a hang on the back, if I'm not too sure that they're going to be cleaning it, a hang on the back is much more easy and accessible for them to clean than say a canister filter. So a canister filter can run for a long time without being cleaned. Not always a great thing. If you got it running for 6 months and you have 6 months worth of crap in your filter, that's not so good. So it's a little more of a pain to clean canisters versus something that you could just kind of reach in, throw in a bucket, and go rinse out your pad. So that would be kind of something else to think about based on kind of what you're keeping, the simplicity of the filtration and the equipment that you're going to go ahead and put on it. The size, of course, is another big factor. Sometimes people just simply have a space that they're trying to put a tank in. Okay, well, how big is that space? If it's 23 inches, you can't get a 24-inch tank. That kind of narrows down our options. Sometimes people have a great big wall, if they're not going to get something like this in there, they want to fill that space. Okay, well, how long is that space? What tank is going to be able, or are they going to be able to maintain more easily? Because just because you have the space and you have the money doesn't necessarily mean you should get something so big, because you do have to care for it, and that takes time. Sometimes it takes money depending on what you're doing. If you're always buying salt to do these 100-gallon water changes on your 900-gallon tank that you got on Craigslist for $6, that's something to consider. So size is often a factor, when talking to people about tanks. Okay, do we have a space we're trying to fill? Yes, the dresser is 36 inches. Okay, well, we can go 30. Things like that. Something else to consider, especially for small tanks, is going with an all-in-one. So there are a lot of nice all-in-ones on the market. This one here is the Ultim 45A. So it's got a nice filter chamber built into the short side here, which makes it kind of a peninsula. So one of the nice things about having an all-in-one is that the filtration's kind of hidden. There's usually a pretty good pile of space, so you can put a bunch of different stuff in there if you need to add extra things, or maybe you just want more pads. But it's all kind of hidden there. You're not going to have equipment hanging off the tank, so you can put it right up against the wall if need be. You're kind of limited on space. And a lot of them are pretty good, as far as the filtration that the companies have put together for those particular tanks. This here's the Ultim all-in-one. Another one that we like a lot are the Fluval tanks, such as the Fluval Flex. You can see a little picture of the filtration here, but gives you plenty of space, adds a little volume to the display. A lot of times you can hide your heater back there, so that's another nice thing about having an all-in-one. You can kind of hide some things back there, hydrometer, thermometer, whatever. And then of course there's price. So there's a lot of things that go into price, acrylic versus glass, regular glass versus low iron glass, tanks with built-in filtration, canister filters, what are you keeping, all those kind of things. But something that I tell people in here pretty often is that all these things are investments into your well-being. You know, aquariums is something that people love to do. You know, they love to have it in their home. It calms them. There's studies that show it, you know, lowers blood pressure. That's why you see them in doctors' offices and dentist's office. You know, calms people down. And it's, you know, it's a fun thing to have, fun thing to do. It's something that everyone enjoys, you know, no matter what your age, where you come from. Everyone can dig a fish tank, you know, especially if it's looking lovely, which I'm sure yours is. Here at the Love Aquarium, we do have many new tanks, but we also do carry used tanks. So, you know, we clean them up, and if they're in good shape and they're ready for something else to live in there, we will have plenty of options for you. So sometimes, you know, you can kind of get into the hobby that way, you know, getting a used tank. Sometimes you got to be careful, you know, picking them up off of Craigslist. You know, people have problems with their equipment, or the tank's chipped up, or, you know, they're the 17th owner and it's 40 years old, and now you're buying it and you move it and now you got a leaking tank at your house. So it doesn't hurt to invest in a new tank. You can set it up the way you like. You don't inherit anyone's old crusty tank, any of their old crusty equipment. You know, a lot of times those tanks will come with fish, and now you got someone else's big old sick fish or something like that. So being able to get a tank, set it up the way you want it from scratch, and like I said, if you take care of it, it's something that you're going to enjoy for years. You know, you and your friends and your family. And yeah, it's just a great addition to the home. You know, you don't want to go bigger than your britches, as they say. You know, get something that you think you'll be able to maintain. But I mean, these things are here to enjoy. They're here for fun. So choose wisely, and of course you can come and talk to us about any of these considerations. If you think there's anything I missed, go ahead and comment below. Let me know, and maybe we'll do a follow-up and we'll get it all covered. Thanks for watching.